Aloha.
Aloha.
I hope you gain more energy today from majestic or magical power. I had a really good story last night. I won't take the time to tell you, but I lost something on the way to do laundry because, like many of you, I came back from China just before the conference, and I'm going back to China again, like you, dealing with jet lags and no time for laundry. So on the road to laundry at the crossroad, I heard something drop out of me. I thought, oh, my earrings. But it's these. Soon I saw this, and inside of it, there are tiny, tiny beads. Healing beads from all the way to Tibet, blessed by many, many, many Bodhisattvas. And I lost them. I gave rest of them to my mom, and I saved 14 years in case I have some situations to save other people, and they're all dropped. I saw the cap rolling that way. I said, okay, I can find the cap for sure. And I was looking, and couldn't find it. 20 minutes later, I couldn't find it. And I started just kneel down, using my flashlight to find one little area at a time, and they just start popping up one after another. Guess what? I felt like there are like 10 or 11. I put it in my pocket, and I start looking that way. This cat is right there in front of me, visibly on the top of the curb. But the curb is not a sharp curve, it's like this hill. Can you imagine this rolling up? I saw it go that way, but it went that way.
We were mocked by cats last night, Stephen and I.
As you read the story. But the story didn't end. I thought there's one or two left. So I continued looking. And all of a sudden, a magical person came up with flashlight. He said, what are you looking? Are you a healer? I said, am I a healer? Really? He said, why did you ask me I'm a healer? He said that you are, I was saying mantras, Buddhist mantra. So I was singing and I was looking this, and he started looking for me. Guess what? He found the last one. So I lost 14 bees, I found 12. The other two are crashed, and I ate them. So I'm healed today. But even more interesting, they are healers. They are from Hawaii. Do you know them? They live next to your building. Yeah, Luna and Kylie. Yeah, something like that. So they are healers. They go to the small island next to Maui. They go there to chant and bring rain cloud back to this island. And they said, yes, real. I said, I know it's real. So today, I think a theme, I had something in mind yesterday, and then I gave you the task. Did you think of a theme today? Beyond our conference theme, just something fun to play with. Collecting more time, I think a theme, mana, might be a good one. Qi, right? In Chinese term is qi, Q-I, and then in English usually spelled C-H-I, qi. Energy, spiritual power, anything you name it, help your body flow, help your environment flow. And in Hawaiian words is mana, M-A-N-A. So I hope that you are full of good qi today and energized after the 2 days intensive program, and be able to relax in qi as well at the same time. So with that is my story, but I'm using that to introduce Dr. Li Wei, with whom I just got to know each other, and I hope that in the future we'll have other projects to know each other. I also do research on translanguaging, but from a different perspective. But Li Wei's work has been very fundamental in SLA and social linguistics. So we're here to hear Dr. Li's talk. Let's welcome him.
Thank you.
Then I'll give you hugs too. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for having me here and for coming to my talk today. In the last couple of days, we've heard a number of plenary speeches that are really on the kind of theoretical ideas and conceptualizing the field for us. What I'm going to do today is a little different. I'm going to tell you very specifically about a research project I have been working with in the last 4 years. Actually, it only finished in March. We had this small extension. It's a massive project looking at what we call translation and translanguage in multilingual practices in a number of cities and specific contexts in these cities across England and Wales, involving a whole team of 21 researchers, not all linguists, several people who are working in other fields, in sociology, sports science, heritage and arts, and various other fields. And I'm going to, the project is also part of a large research program funded by the National Research Council for Arts Humanities. The aim of the program is to boost modern foreign language research in the UK. Not only modern foreign language education is in crisis, modern foreign language research is definitely and has been in crisis for some time in the UK. So it is really through new ways of conceptualizing modern foreign language research and translation studies that the Research Council, which is a government funding body, wants to boost the field. But as you can see, really only 1 out of the 3 funded, these are multi-million pounds research projects, was on modern foreign language education or modern foreign language research in particular. The other 2, including ours, are really about multilingualism instead. Now, ours is a community-based participatory linguistics project. I'm going to explain what we mean by that in a minute. We looked at multilingual practices in 4 cities, but 4 different contexts within each city: community business, community arts, community sports, and community socio-legal practices. And I'm going to use examples of the community sports bit of the London site to make my points today. It is based on this project. It's an empirical project. It's a case study, if you like. But I want to really advocate some theoretical points and make some theoretical and methodological arguments as well. So it's not just giving you lots of data. I was going to do that, but that's probably not a good idea. So, but it's following my general approach to research in applied linguistics. It's very much a practice, theory practice idea that I wrote about in my recent paper. So the key, the structure and the key points that I want to make today is language learning is a process of cultural translation through embodied re-semioticization. And I'm going to define these concepts in a minute. And I will talk mainly about translanguaging as a practical theory of language and communication, but today the focus is on translanguaging as a practical theory of learning. The examples I'm going to give you are about translation, translating, and translanguaging karate in a multilingual, multi-ethnic karate club in East London. The idea of doing this project, and particularly looking at language learning as cultural translation within a community sports context, is to broaden the scope of language learning beyond the classroom. Language learning was never constrained to the classroom. It's a very modern idea. Well, the classroom is a modern idea. And in fact, in the majority of the world, classroom does not exist as a physical context. There are still lots and lots of communities that don't really have the Western idea of a school or a classroom. And the so-called instructed language learning is also something that we want to re-examine through this process of looking at learning in a community physical activity context. And we want to really rethink about the boundaries between language use and language learning. And we really want to regard language learning as a lifelong, life-wide experience. And there are some other questions that we want to raise and want to challenge, including the idea that one has the aim of language learning is to gain complete knowledge of a linguistic system. Now that, I think, it's a totally unachievable idea. Even if you are a native speaker, you don't have the complete knowledge of your own first language, let alone second. And I was talking to Steve yesterday about redefining learning in this context, and he gave me some really interesting ideas. But at least within our context, we are looking at learning as capacity building for participation in real life situations, or skilled linguistic action, as Stephen talked about yesterday, not simply the acquisition of skills or transmission of information or knowledge. So these are quite important theoretical and underlying theoretical conceptualizations. And there will be a paper on language learning as a process of cultural translation in applied linguistics later in the year. And it's very much based on this particular case. And here we are looking at translation in a very broad way. It's not just rendering one linguistic function into another language, but really making meaning and representing ideas through different medium, but also looking at the processes of interlingual and intermediate and intercultural mediation. And we have our ways of defining what culture means as well. Just to give you an overview of the large project, we have been working in Birmingham, Cardiff, Leeds, and of course London. Within each city, we're looking at business, heritage, sports, and law. So, and we're also looking at the social media, digital media use of all the sites. I'm going to define what we mean by participatory linguistics in a minute, but it is a project that follows a specific research design. Now, in each site, we identify key participants who are collecting data for us. We're not there doing the recording, etc. We do observations and we take notes. And those observations and notes between by our teams will be part of the data that we analyze, but we're analyzing each other's observations rather than what we observe in the field. What comes out of the field, as it were, are collected by the participants themselves. They make the recordings, they make notes, and they then send it to us. It's a multi-party ethnography kind of work. We then analyze our interpretations of the data provided by the key participants, if you see what I mean. I'm going to explain that in a bit more detail in a minute. Let me say something about participatory linguistics. As I say, this actually explains, for each of the 4 domains in 4 cities, it's team ethnography conducted over a 4-month period for a particular domain, plus recordings and everything. So for each of the community, we have a language entry point. So for London, we use the Polish-speaking community as the entry point. We're not at all interested in Polish as a language, or we're not at all interested in the Polish-speaking community per se. We're interested in this community as an entry point to see what are the kind of language speakers they interact with, and how they then fit into the multilingual and multicultural landscape of London. And we then, within the community, we identify key participants who actually play a specific social role in the community, who will be doing the data collection for us. Now, participatory linguistics. Now, in linguistics, there's been quite a lot of discussion about participatory research in linguistics. So subjects are being studied, then actively take part in documenting, describing, and analyzing language they speak. There's also the talk of linguistics of participation, language use as participation of or in social activity and the cultural world and all that. Ours is slightly different. Our way of doing this is we argue, we believe that the observer analyst, that's us, our job is to try and make sense of the participants trying to make sense of their world. So this is the double hermeneutic that my colleague and friend Jonathan Smith always talks about. And by trying to make sense of their trying to make sense of the world, and we're participating in their social world and in the construction of their social world as well. And indeed, their social world becomes part of ours, and ours becomes part of theirs. So this dual kind of process is really important for the way we approach research. As I say, we don't use so-called objective observational data as data. In fact, all our data are kind of subjective notes and recordings of the way we did it. And then that's what we analyze. And our analysis of what we have observed, which is necessarily subjective, we as analysts have a responsibility to be very open and explicit about our own positions and our ideologies. So it's very much this idea of analysis as a social act itself. And doing linguistics, we really strongly believe in this, that doing linguistics has social consequences. We're participating in the social act, as I've just said, through the way we represent the community, their speakers and their languages and language practice in our analysis. And I think that is an important point that is not always made explicit. The way we represent what we observe has a social consequence. It is, of course, determined by our own positions and ideologies as well. But the social consequences are equally important. So in our project, we see our responsibility not simply as describing which language is being used to whom and when, but to participate in a social debate over the value of multilingualism and over the consequence of communities speaking different languages or named languages coming together in an era of diversity or even super diversity in a place like London. When we question the boundaries of the named languages, this is a very key position of the translanguage perspective, of course. And we also explore what learning means in the outside the classroom kind of context. So let me say something about the karate club that we've been working with. It is located in East London, which is relatively deprived. It's where the London Olympics took place. It's in Newham, the borough of Newham, one of the most linguistically and ethnically diverse boroughs of England. In fact, it's the most linguistically and ethnically diverse boroughs in London. Census data suggested over 300 different named languages. It's not always reliable, these census questions, because they're not terribly sensible questions. And people have difficulty defining them and identify themselves with these languages. But nevertheless, it's a hugely diverse borough, and it's kind of socially and economically deprived. The club is housed in a community centre on Barking Road. It's a very, very famous road. It takes about 45 minutes to drive from one end to another. It crosses several boroughs in London, and it's an interesting part of the landscape, actually. And we did some really interesting kind of walking as a social science method these days is very popular. We've done that as well. The club is organized and sponsored by a charity for Polish Roma people, but open to all people in the borough. there is a big sociological literature on why sporting clubs are more common in socially and economically deprived areas. That's a really interesting urban sociological issue. There's a vast amount of discussion there. And of course, we are also taking part in that kind of debate. It is open mainly to children, but there are some young adults as well. The key participants is SK, a Roma from Poland, a well-known karate practitioner and instructor. There's no way to hide his identity because he's actually something of a local celebrity. We knew him before we started the project. We knew his family. His son is also acting as an interpreter for the Polish Roma community. And his portrait was exhibited as 40 outsiders in London. I thought the title of that exhibition was incredibly interesting, actually, because he was held as a success story, but nevertheless it was outsiders in London. He's the official instructor. He does speak English, and he speaks English with us and our Polish-speaking assistant, but he feels his English is limited, so he has the help of a Roma boy who really grew up in London. The club runs itself as Roma Karate Club in London, but only very few participants are of Roma origin or heritage. And it's called Aga Khan after a club that he ran, or he was trained in Poland. There are some really interesting kind of symbols, artifacts there. Now, if I ask you the question, who's karate, or which nationality or which culture would you associate karate with? Japan, usually, yes. but your response is interesting because as we started this project, we discovered a vast body of literature on the cultural translation of karate, and that's why we also got into the idea of learning as a cultural translation, and it's a really, really interesting history. Now, the actual, the real proper name pronunciation of karate is karate-do. It's way or path of empty hands. Te is hand, do is the path or the way. Now, I don't know whether there's any Japanese speakers here today, but kara is, in this case, represented by that kanji character, meaning empty. But this is a really interesting point. It's a detailed linguistic point, but it's a really, really crucial point. That in no other context would that character be read as kara. In Japanese, because it's the pronunciation would be sora. And very few people, including famous linguists and scholars in Japan, when I talk about this, they would actually say why that is the case. Well, you know, how come this particular character is pronounced in this way as kara, as in karate-do? Now, because kara, the actual kanji representing the pronunciation of kara is Tang, or in the Chinese character would be Tang. It's the name of the Tang dynasty, it's the Golden Dynasty, where Zen Buddhism really moved from China to Japan. And it was originally called in kanji as China hand, quite literally, karate means China hand. And historical records of practicing and training empty hand combat techniques in China really dated from the 14th century. So it was absolutely true. It originated in China as a martial arts kind of practice, but it flourished in Okinawa. Okinawans have a very long history of settlement in Hawaii. But at the time, the history is important and the timeline is extremely important. Okinawa was a tributary of China, not of Japan, had little contact officially with Japan. Now, even in Okinawa, karate was understood as China hand, was a Chinese martial art practice, was foreign. But, and of course, the Okinawans and the Chinese had a long and complex cultural relationship, lots of mixed marriages. This is one of those very famous Japanese actors, but he's half Chinese, half Okinawan, and he speaks fluent Chinese and Japanese, as well as English. He's not so active now. And if you go to the tourist websites for Okinawa, of course, karate is represented there, or included there. The Japanese invasion, the Japanese from mainland Japan, or the main islands, all the islands of Japan, happened in 1609, and it became both a tributary of China and of Japan, because the Chinese emperors would not trade with anybody unless you have a kind of dual control of the place, and it's a very interesting relationship. There was a lot of resistance and hostility against the Japanese occupation or invasion by the local Okinawans. I think the relationship is, of course, very different, but Okinawans have a very strong sense of ethnicity and their own identity even today. And we all know what happened during the Second World War. The US used this as a major military base and occupied it for some time. I think the US military is still there. And it was after the annexation by Japan, karate was actually introduced as a foreign martial arts practice into mainland Japan. And the whole process of Japanization of karate really was very, very interesting and very complex. First of all, they changed the written character of the name karate without changing the pronunciation. So instead of the character meaning China, they chose the character empty to give it a more spiritual kind of connotation, to elevate the practice to some sort of metaphysical realm, I guess. And yesterday's theme was emptiness. I mean, it's very much the emptiness that was, or nothingness in Buddhist, especially Zen Buddhism. It's not having nothing. Emptiness is the highest achievable realm, as it were, in Buddhism. It's a purity of mind that you can possibly achieve, and it's a highly valued practice. And they also added the suffix of do as a part, again making it almost like part of the Buddhist traditional practice. And it's been ritualized, militarized, and unified, and creating a specific karate language with these formulaic demands. It's very interesting that lots of sports and art forms have these formulaic language structures specific for instruction. And it's got a ranking system with colored belts and everything. I think there are lots of people practicing that in Hawaii, and I know that in fact. But the further translation of karate as time went by happened after, or during and after the Second World War, when the US militaries were stationed in Okinawa. They learned the practice as the Japanese martial arts, because I think really quite basically they didn't understand the difference between Okinawans and mainland Japan, so they just took it as the Japanese martial art. And of course, again, there is a subtle difference in the pronunciation this time. It's not karate do, it's just karate. If you say karate do to an English speaker, they will look at you and say, what do you mean? If you say karate, they kind of know what you mean. And that occupation by the US military and the return to US mainland really started the international global popularization of karate as a Japanese martial art. It's now, as I said, there's a huge literature on whose karate it is. There's a World Karate Federation. They claim there are over 100 million karate practitioners worldwide. There's only about 12 million of the whole Japanese population. So you know there are more non-Japanese practicing it as a Japanese martial art in the world than actual Japanese. Now in mainland Japan, of course, it does exist. There are karate clubs, but it is not one of those things that every Japanese does. It really isn't, and it is still regarded by many Japanese as an Okinawan thing. Everybody kind of knows that kind of association with Okinawa. Coming back to London, it's located, as I said earlier, in a linguistically and ethnically highly diverse and somewhat deprived area. Now, this is the community club as it normally looks like. And on days when the karate club takes place, it's transformed into a dojo. With a colored mat, the dojo code, which is hidden by a behind a cupboard door, and it all displayed, and the pictures of the master and everything. And these are the kind of database that we have. I won't go through all of that. Now, usually about 20 children for each session. There is Thursday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and the weekend. And there are some older ones. Now, 6 claim to be Polish L1 speakers, the rest are of different ethnic and linguistic background. None is Japanese or East Asian. They're all European kind of based. And you see the language. Now, when we did have a question, why is this club so popular, and what do they actually learn? I mean, in this particularly diverse and deprived area, parents seem to be extremely enthusiastic sending their children to this club, and they really think it's been very, very successful in attracting the students. And they actually pass grades. The grading, they are regarded as very successful amongst all the karate clubs. There are over 100 of them in London alone. And the kids really do feel much more confident. They're really, really happy. They're extremely talkative. And we know that many of them are poor achievers in their ordinary schools. And some of them have been reported by their teachers that they don't speak, they don't read or write, they don't take part in anything in school. But in this club, they are absolutely totally different people. So that's something really interesting. But anyway, within that context, we've got all this data. We were thinking, what do we do with it? Of course, we take a translanguaging perspective. Now, I don't have the time or the need to explain all the backgrounds to translanguaging. Just wanted to point out there are different origins of the concept of translanguaging. The actual term was invented by Colin Baker in trying to translate his former PhD student, Ken Williams' work, because Ken Williams wrote his PhD in Welsh and nobody could read or pronounce, and he used that particular term to describe the bilingual practices in the Welsh revitalization program, when the teacher tried very hard to teach everything in English, and the kids all in Welsh rather, the kids all responded in English. Initially, Colin Baker use the word translinguifying. Obviously, nobody can follow that one. And he then changed it to translanguaging. And Ophelia Garcia, of course, extended the idea of translanguaging with reference to bilingual education in the States. Now, I came from a slightly different origin to this. My use of the term translanguaging is really translanguaging, really from the languaging origin that many of you here are very familiar with and really leading that work. Again, there are two origins to that. One is the sociocultural theories in second-hand position. Mira Swain, in particular, talked about languaging of advanced second-language learners, and the Hallidayan systemic functional grammar and distributed language and cognition history or tradition of languaging work. And I explained all of that in my earlier paper in 2011. And it was really very generous for the Colin Baker group to acknowledge that difference in the origins. Now, I must admit, I first came across the term languaging from interactions and meetings and discussions with Pete Becker, rather than Stephen or Paul sooner. I came to yours a little bit later, but Becker's work on linguistic anthropology was really, really influential. I think somewhat undervalued, actually. He wrote a small, short paper. It's a commentary on Neumeier's piece, and he talked in a big way on languaging. And of course, Halliday talks about language as a meaning potential, and linguistics is the study of how people exchange meaning by languaging. And again, I don't really need to go through any of this because they're from people here, but I really love that metaphorical reference, the word orchestration. And orchestrate, I think that's really, really crucial. Because to me, music making is meaning making, and you can't really say one instrument is necessarily more important than another in that meaning making process. And it's not also, I've been trying to make that point, it's not the quantity of the contribution, but the quality of the contribution, but the process of orchestration that is really, really crucial. There again, I don't need to repeat that. But I think within that literature that I've learned from colleagues here is the idea that we need to rethink language not as an organism-centered or organ, the brain-centered kind of entity. I think that really, but as a multi-scalar organization of processes. I think that's really, really crucial. And then it really led me to question the divides between so-called linguistic, paralinguistic, and extralinguistic dimensions of human communication. And I work closely with colleagues on gestures and nonverbal communication, especially sign language users. They just think it's all a bit of nonsense trying to divide what is linguistic, what isn't. And of course, colleagues here also emphasize the importance of feeling and experience and history and all that. I think the key thing for today is the idea from the languaging view on language learning that is also really, really important. The novice does not acquire language in the traditional sense, but rather they adapt their bodies and brains to the languaging activity that surrounds them. I think that's a really crucial point for me, and again goes back to the idea of participatory linguistics. They are participating in the cultural world and learn, that they can get things done through with others through languaging. We want to understand. We then participate in their participation of their cultural world as analysts, as linguists. But by adding the trans prefix, I did and I do want to raise a number of further questions. It's not just as a descriptive label about multilingual practices. I have trouble with the kind of mixed and misinterpretation of two of the key theoretical hypotheses in modern linguistics, contemporary linguistics. One is about the relationship between language and thought that we heard some people talking about. I think there is a lot of misreading of Jerry Fodor's hypothesis about language of thought. I don't have any problem with having a language of thought, but it does not mean that you think in the language you speak, in the named language kind of way. And I specifically, with reference to multilinguals, I want to raise I want to make the point that multilinguals do not think unilingually, even if they are in the monolingual mode, and producing one language only for a specific chunk of speech or text. So I'm speaking English, but I'm not thinking only in English or in any specific kind of named language. I personally don't believe in that, but anyway, that's controversial, obviously. The other hypothesis that I want to question, or the interpretation of the hypothesis that we want to question through translanguaging work, is modularity of mind. And human beings think beyond language, and it's very obvious from all the interesting work from gestural communication, sign language, and multimodality. And thinking requires the use of a variety of cognitive semiotic modal resources, and language in its conventional sense of speech and writing is only one of them. And this work is clearly influenced by my daily interactions with colleagues in the Center for Multimodal Research in my department, in fact, in my corridor. That's good to press there. And with DCAL, Deafness, Cognition and Language Center, and the multimodal lab in UCL, which is really different from the multimodal center that Gunter directs. It's more multimodal kind of speech production, interpretation. And there, colleagues working on multimodal communication and gesture communication and sign language raise a really interesting question in one of their key publications in the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society. It's a very influential journal. What would modern contemporary linguistic models and theories look like if we started with sign language as opposed to European, spoken European languages? And I can easily ask the same question with reference to Chinese and other non-European languages. I think the answer is that they will look very different. The theories and models will look very different. And I have some of these ideas in the publications, recent ones. And the third area that I want to raise questions about through the idea of translanguaging is about, of course, about language evolution, the origins of language. It seems that people think language mixing is such a new thing. It's a post-multilingualism. I mean, I'm to blame to some extent because I talk about post-multilingualism. But it's not. I mean, all languages are mixtures. I mean, that's how languages evolved into their kind of being. The naming of languages is a very recent modern thing. It's related to the mention of the nation state, and it's political. So I will have the Scandinavian languages. I will have the Chinese dialects to illustrate those points. And of course, I'm also interested in linguistic creativity and play and their roles in language evolution and what is happening to new media linguistic practices. And a few centuries down the line, looking back at what people do with new media these days, would probably be really quite significant in linguistic innovation and change and introducing new ways of communication. Anyway. within that theorization of translanguaging, I'm still working on this. It's not quite there yet, but I'm working on a paper about the translanguaging moment. Methodologically, we want to look at, we're not seeking patterns or regularities or frequencies. That's not really our interest. We're interested in those fairly ordinary moments that have a consequence, but it's a sequential consequence that we are interested in. Those moments come with a package, as it were. There are three quite crucial elements. So, as an individual language user, we have the instinct to go beyond language and making use of all the linguistic resources available to make meaning and also make sense. We also have to have the affordances of a particular space in order to realize our instinct or to make use of our instinct. And that is the translanguage space that we are talking about. That could be a historical space, it could be a cultural space, it could be a physical space. And then the signs that we produce would have to have translanguaging potential for others to interpret. So these three elements are really crucial. And with these three elements together, you then come to a moment. But that moment is triggered or is produced by the hearer and by the reader. It's not by the producer or the language speaker. So I think in linguistic theory and the general approaches, we need to shift our attention from the speaker, the producer, to the hearer, to the receiver, to the reader. And this is also part of my long-term kind of interest, trying to move pragmatic theories from in picture, which we know so much about, there's so many computation models and the rest of it, to inferencing that Gumpers and lots of other people talked about in the 70s, but actually there isn't a proper model. How do we interpret a sign when, in fact, in language learning, how do we interpret a new item, a novel item? That puzzles so many scientists, but also agonizes language teachers in the classroom as well. Now, we don't, when we are engaged in face-to-face interaction, when we hear something that for the first time, we don't ask people to repeat. In fact, that doesn't help at all. We try to then draw other cues, and we normally look at the person, their facial expression, their gestures, or we try to inference from the intonation and various other cues to see if we can work out the meaning. And that moment is a translanguaging moment, and you need to go beyond named languages and beyond language alone to draw other things. In fact, asking people to repeat however many times is not going to help you with the interpretation. And that's the kind of point where we're coming from. I don't need to repeat this here, but we really do not deny the existence of the named languages. We basically say they are political entities that have to be recognized, and part of that analysis is to recognize that political and ideological connotation of it. Now, I'm going to show you a quick example of how what is happening in this club, how they learn to say us. With body gesture, how they learn the protocol in this context, the performance of hierarchy and various positions. It's really important to say this, that also as a really key command in karate practice, but also in ordinary Japanese conversation, is one of those untranslatable items, and all languages have them. It hasn't got, well, it has got a literal meaning, but the literal meaning means press and endure. Now, but you can't really explain, you can't teach that to a child to to use it in context until you actually see it being used. This is the point. You have to see it physically being used in order to understand how it is going to be used and the meaning, the multiple meanings of it. You're learning multiple things at the same time, And language learning is not divorced from learning other things. So let me just very quickly, I'm running out of time.
You're okay, Dr. Lee.
Shall we?
We can just
Not us like this. Us.
Yeah, not us like this, us.
That is what? 9. Yes. Next. 11. Each left. Right. Okay. Faccia linea. Right. And you see.
You can see our assistant at the back.
Very important. Stand up. Is right. The same way. Left and same. Pause. Same way. And go back. Go.
Chin up. They're bowing towards the portrait of the master. Look at the new one coming in. He's waiting for his cue. You see, he says us. Okay. Let me stop there. Just going back to the. I mean, I do have the detailed transcription, and it's a multimodal transcription, and you can really analyze the details. And there, if you could, I don't know whether you heard any Polish, but there are Polish phrases there as well. And it's it's formally Japanese, English, and a bit Polish there. And there's Romani as well. That's not the point, but it's about the details, the intricacies of how to use this us expression in 3 different contexts, actually, at least 3 different contexts. Through embodiment, it is a physical learning. It's very much a physical learning. So you can't really divorce this type of learning. It's no good to talk about language learning separately from cultural learning, from the translation of cultural value and tradition and other kind of semiotic and modal systems. That's our very basic point we want to make. And there are lots of other examples from our case study, but also from other languages, other contexts, that really to teach a language, you need to go through this whole complex process of cultural translation, through physical demonstration and the physical engagement of that. And also the strategic use and engagement of the so-called truncated repertoire. I really hate that idea, of any kind of incomplete and truncated kind of linguistic repertoire. But it's also, and the importance of repetition and imitation, they're all there. I have another video, but I don't have the time to do that. Just really to summarize quickly. We look at this dojo as a space created by and for translanguage practices, as you saw in that little example. It's a space where the interactions of multilingual individuals, the kids, break down the artificial dichotomies and boundaries between the micro and the macro, the social and the individual, and the societal and the individual, and the social and the cycle. To us, these dichotomies really don't make any real sense. And the translanguaging space allows the multilingual individual to integrate social spaces that have been formerly or previously or otherwise practiced separately in different spaces, bring that together. It's not just bringing together or hybridity that we're interested in. It's something that they build upon through that process. It does not merely encompass a mixture or hybridity of first or second language. It really it is an example of languaging, but with new possibilities, producing new possibilities as a site of creativity and power. And that's really important. It goes beyond language in this case, and really refers to the transformation of the present. This space brings together different repertoires, resources, histories, experiences, identities into a context, and integrating various semiotic resources and repertoires, not just linguistic repertoires, physical repertoires as well, and semiotic repertoires, into coordinated, orchestrated, and meaningful performance and social action. And really, we want to emphasize the orchestration of multiple resources and complexity of everyday interaction. The instructor, the dojo master, was really teaching them the physical movement, the left leg, right leg, the bowing, the kneeling, and the direction where the face, together with the language. And the language is an important part of it, but it's certainly not the only part of it. So in this translanguaging space, learning, including language learning, becomes a process of embodied re-semioticization. And I want to just conclude by saying, teaching and learning is a very complex process of meaning and sense-making. In this karate club, it involves multiple named languages and multiple semiotic and modal resources. There's no single language or sign or gesture or resource that is more important than another. That really is very important. I mean, it's a basic point to us, but it's very important to emphasize that, because in our analysis, you still see lots of people only focusing on one. They have to work together, and they do work together in meaning and sense-making. And the translanguaging lens highlights that complexity and multiplicity of resources, the embodied teaching and learning, and overcomes the monolingual and lingual bias. So, in conclusion, participatory linguistics project in the cultural linguistic translation, transmission, and transformation facilitated through translanguaging, where multilingual, multimodal, and multisensory, semiotic resources are utilized and orchestrated in embodied re-semioticization, which we call learning. As an analytical approach, translanguaging helps us to take a really, truly holistic look at this kind of process and challenge. We want to really challenge the competence-based models that are built on the assumption of completeness of linguistic and cultural knowledge. We really question that, whether it's just linguistic systems or about cultural completeness. Therefore, competence resides in the orchestration of the multiple fragments, and that's the point that we want to make. And nobody can claim the complete knowledge of one specific language, even if you claim to be the native speaker of that language. And no one can claim complete knowledge of a culture either. And translanguaging in this participatory linguistic framework aims to challenge the boundaries between named languages and between language and other cognitive and semiotic systems, and between the boundaries of cultures or named cultures as well. And we want to emphasize the transformative potential of translanguaging, not just about the form and practice, but also about transforming cultural understanding, the power relations, and the subjectivities. As I say, the kids coming out of the karate club really do feel they are a different individual in specific contexts, of course, and they then build new relationships with other people. But we also want to say that participating in this social act, as we do in participatory linguistics, is trying to make sense of the participants themselves, trying to make sense of their world in everyday lives. And it transforms our understanding as well, and our own analyst subjectivities as well. It's a process of learning for us as well as for the people we've been working with or we've been studying. We actually don't feel we are studying them. It's more about our own transformation that we benefit from. And it is a process of cultural translation for ourselves. Thank you very much.
That was a fantastic presentation. That was really great. And I think you've got, I mean, in cognitive science, Jerome Bruner, many, many years ago, I think in the late 60s, but I might be wrong, had, or maybe it was in the 70s, it came back to it, the original problem was how do we get beyond the information given? And of course, Jerome Bruner was one of the people at the beginning, and then he became very disillusioned with cognitive science, and wrote about it differently and presented a narrative thinking process and a more analytical thinking process. But he never really managed to answer that question. And my sense is that what is so interesting about your presentation is that one of the phrases I've been noticing through this conference, sorry, it's a long question. One of the phrases I've been noticing in this conference as it comes from the more postmodern people is this idea that you sometimes have agency. Now what it seems to me that your presentation is doing is showing how through discipline it's possible to make agency. And that of course is precisely Maturana's point with the observer as well. And that seems to be just so important because I think what you're showing is about something which you can't get at without cognition being more fundamental than communication.
Yes. Yeah. No, I agree.
Do you agree with that?
Absolutely.
And what do you think they actually learn in that judo club?
Well, I mean, personally, I think it's probably the wrong question. Sorry, I don't think we should ask what the question of what. I really don't think that's the right question because I don't think you get a very clear answer. That may be a problem for some people looking at what we do and thinking, wow, you can't give concrete answers to what, therefore it's not science, it's not scientific. But that's exactly what we're trying to get away from. It's achieving understanding on our behalf. I mean, we're moving away from describing and observing facts, as it were. We're really emphasizing every stage of the process is subjective, and it's actually really, really important. I think where agency comes from is a question we want to address, for example. You know, we want to emphasize that these people are trying, you know, they're just living their everyday life, and they're making sense of this new specific environment. And we come in and we want to make sense of their making sense of that. And then we, you know, this process can continue. I mean, you know, Johnson Smith, I just said, you know, we can use this example several times, and we can then show our analysis to these people and say, hey, what do you think of our interpretation? How do we interpret our interpretation? And then, you know, the cycle goes on and on. And that process is fundamental. But every cycle, then you have a transformation. You know, you have new things coming. You make new agency. And, you know, yeah.
If I may just quickly, I totally agree with you. I think what they're learning is that subjectively is important and it is accomplished.
Yes. Yes. They learn, they build, they expand their capacity to participate in the next cycle, as it were.
By participating, you become as a subject. Yeah. And it's that loss of subjectivity which is what we need to bring back
Okay,
to
okay, yes,
cognition,
yeah.
and
right.
is lost by the postmodernists who are so focused on how we can have agency.
Right, yeah. I mean, it's a very fine balance, of course. You know, lots of people take it as a purely social approach. But like you, I don't want to lose the cognitive side, and I think, well, Quentin Press would say everything. The cognitive is also social.
Okay, so Paul and Saeed, we are okay with time because we have a general assembly. No, I'm saying we're okay with time, so we can extend a little bit. Paul, please.
Yeah. First of all, just a little follow-on from something Stephen said, then the question. On the issue of subjectivity, as Stephen knows, I've been working on this idea of self and solving.
Yeah.
And it seemed to me that when you talked about how in this karate club, these kids really come forth, that they actually are able to bring forth in presence selves, which of course I think are emergent products of contextualization dynamics and so on, rather than, well, there is a biological aspect to it, too, most certainly. And then you said, and I thought this was really interesting, how these same kids are doing very badly in school.
Yeah.
And it seems as though it couldn't be then just that they are not able to solve adequately in that environment.
Or the environment does not provide the right kind of support or affordance, for them to develop. I think that's. I mean, none of these kids would possibly be regarded as a potential language learner in the school. They may well be excluded from foreign language classes because they are struggling with English literacy, and they probably won't teach them French and German. But I always say to these people, I mean, why the hell do you teach French and German in these classes in this community? I mean, what's the use of that for them? But never mind the use. But there are lots of languages that they encounter on an everyday basis. Look, teach them something interesting or get them involved in that. They want to make friends with other kids speaking another language. I mean, teaching them Polish would be much more useful and interesting than these really boring French classes. for this particular group of kids who are struggling otherwise.
I mean, because politically, identity politics puts all these identities on display.
Yeah.
But there's something much more fundamental, isn't there?
Yeah.
And that's this solving that
That's right.
also comes from within.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
Yeah.
That's true, actually. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
That wasn't my question, but I'll leave it go.
Thank you very much. This was a presentation after my own heart, and I'll give you an example. I teach Hindi here, Hindi and Urdu, and I teach vocabulary through movement. Some of you who were
Yes,
at,
I heard your presentation.
You were at
Yeah,
presentation, yeah. So the dance class actually that came out of the Hindi class, because we started just expanding it in public places and making it more and more inclusive. I see a parallel in what you presented with my own experience. And then I'm very happy that you brought applied linguistics angle to this, because I was doing this activity without any knowledge of sort of applied fields in academia that I could look through the lens of to analyze this activity that we were all doing for fun. We were dancing and we were learning, and because Bollywood dance is basically an interpretive dance activity, we were learning Hindi, Urdu nuances through the movements that we were teaching each other.
Yeah.
None of them were actually students. There were doctors and engineers and surfers and grad students, children, all of them together. My question sort of goes back to agency in some ways. It was only after peace studies scholars came to my class by chance, because he was a keynote speaker in another conference, and he came to my dance class, and then he said, do you realize that you're engaging in positive peace activities here, that you're actually taking a language class and expanding it to a completely community-building, thriving atmosphere in which people gathered the courage to and sort of have and make agency for themselves to realize that the courage that they received in the dance class, they could stand up to domestic violence, they could deal with hierarchies and depression and so on. All of that was happening, but we weren't aware of what we were actually accomplishing. And so it's a question of sort of having agency, making agency, and then being aware of what you're actually doing. My question is, your research that you are doing with that example, are you bringing it back to them and telling them this is what is happening?
We do, actually. I mean, this is part of it. It's a really good development in the last 10 years or so in the funding regime in Britain. It really has to have social impact, an impact on policy and practice in particular. And without that, and you need to have, a third of the proposal needs to specify pathways to impact. What exactly do you do with what you do? That's why we want to advocate this participatory linguistics approach. We're really working with them and see what is beneficial. What are the questions that they want to ask? You know, how they want to ask about. They want to find out how to engage with these kids more socially and educationally. Outside the class, outside schools. So this is one of the activities they're interested in, and we then come in. But we're not just doing it in the way that, okay, here's our finding, you know, make use of it, or wouldn't be useful if you do. But we do show them that as the next step, how do you then interpret our way of interpreting this? And does this make sense to you, or what do you then realize? And that process itself, I mean, doing research really has the social consequence. Yeah. It's just a way of raising awareness and think, oh, okay, is that what we do? Is that how we organize things? And this, you know, there's so many things that they didn't consciously kind of, you know, ask themselves about. And raise questions about. Now they are. And I think that it's really important. You know, scientifically, maybe the questions we're asking are fairly basic, but actually socially, they're really, really relevant and important. And I think that's how we approach things. Well, thank you for your comment, and I really enjoyed your presentation.
Thanks.
With that, any other questions?
I can ask one here, since you have the time. What happens in the karate class, the kind of learning and cognitive languaging, as we say, that you display, does that, can we really say that that shows agency happening within the learners? I mean, is there an agency response, or is it just interpersonal mirroring? Because it seems that a lot of this kind of learning is unconscious mirroring that goes on all the time. But is it a property of the, my question is that, can we consider it a property of the mind, or should we consider it an actual agency emerging in that context?
Well, I mean, it's a hard question to answer in a short period of time, but I mean, it depends on what you mean by agency, and you know, there are different levels and degrees we talked about, but you know, it also, whose point of view are you speaking from? But from the kids' point of view, their agency is only to the extent that they can understand and they can have ownership of. You can't expect them to have the same kind of agency that adults or the instructor would kind of impose on them or allow them to have. I do think they feel ownership of what they're learning or what they're doing. They absolutely feel, you know, they are part of this. And I mean, there are so many things that I can show you. The beginning and the end of an event are so important. The way they can't come in, and as I say, I showed you, ordinarily it's just a community center, it's fairly bare, but they come in and lay out the mat, and you know, open the cupboards and put on the decorations and everything. Each time they come in, and at the end, everybody is so enthusiastic in putting the mats back, and tidy up the place. All these things are really, really important because this is not just part of the dojo code that you have to do this, but it's also part of that, that ownership and that, their agency, as it were. They really own this space and they create that space for themselves to enable them to learn more. And each time they go home really, really happy and they talk to their parents about what they've learned today. And it's an amazing kind of experience for us. And after 4 months of weekly observation there and participation, we observed, we made the recording, but you saw our assistants at the back there actually participating in the learning. We couldn't believe that they are still so enthusiastic. In some cases, they've been going there for a number of years. Each time they're so enthusiastic.
And just super quickly, I agree with Stephen Callie's earlier comment that sometimes agents, it's certainly not a possession, And I really like what you talked about just now in terms of ownership. And we discussed this briefly yesterday, but there are, agency, if it's anything, leaving it aside, it's not a radio button on/off. You have it or you don't.
No.
So this idea that you just mentioned of how participants are the folks that participate actually extends beyond that to contribution, as we described yesterday with Anasta Tinko's work. So they may be participating with explicit instruction and all of that in the practice in the dojo. However, they're contributing when they're helping with the maps.
Yeah.
And that, so we need to think about, I think, this idea of agency along some sort of continuum from engagement to participation to contribution or something. And Stephen shaking his head, don't say anything though. Because I think agency is this flat on/off. You have it or you don't. I'm not, of course, what I'm saying is that's the way it's sometimes talked about. They're either agentive or non-agentive dynamics. And I think what you're presenting here are very different ways for people to engage in, participate in, and contribute to, demonstrably contribute to the sort of complexities that constitute this.
Thanks for that. And linking back to the question of the social impact, and what we're doing right now is to work with the so-called mainstream schools and making the teachers there realize, okay, your pupils are participating in other social activities outside the classroom, outside the school. Now they've been talking about bring the school to home because they always want to involve the parents. Okay, and tell the parents what the kids have learned in school. Now we want to say involve parents in a different way. Bring the community, bring the home into the school. Give them an opportunity on Monday mornings. Ask them what they have been doing over the weekend in the community center, what they have learned, and how that could contribute to their daily school activities, institutionalized activities. And that's been having a terrific impact actually, because some of the kids are feeling much more confident and much more involved in the mainstream schools because they've been given the opportunity to be asked what they're doing outside the school. So that's a kind of
like this Louis Mo funds of knowledge kind of
absolutely.
As you see this integration between. Yeah, I like that. I love that idea.
Thank you. Anyone here? I have really enjoyed this conversation on agency, but I have a slightly different question. Maybe we can follow up. But
sure.
The differences between translingual practices and translanguaging. In light of Lydia He's work, she traces translingual like words going to Japan from China and then come back to China in different meaning. So in terms of tangshou, like China hand and it becomes kongshou. That's fascinating. And that's another layer of practice that probably these kids eventually can get to through their embodied engagement. But able to trace what they're doing to a tradition that is travel through and travel back and travel again to other places that changing its form and linguistic forms as well. He's karate and then different forms of tai chi and kung fu. They're just taking in counter meaning. So to me, that is really fascinating. Little fact that you talk about.
No, thank you for that.
Yeah.
I mean, there are lots of complexities there about these martial art forms. I mean, you know, the essence is exactly the same across.
Right.
But of course, they've all been nationalized in the labels.
Exactly,
and
the
names.
labels, it's the labels that separate us. Now we want to collapse that into qi. So I thought that's really fascinating how it works, because karate basically practicing is increasing this manner, increasing this power, give them not just a linguistic identity, I mean the embodied involvement, but linguistic identity, give them strength, confidence, and creativity. That goes to yesterday Professor Wang's Qu, that the amazing one word has all these meaning, completion, extension, and creativity. And if we give it to more dynamic terms, this completing, extending, and creating, that's the carry us through in different diverse space and time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.